The purpose of literature was sort of to reveal the human condition, to show aesthetic beauty. And the way literature was taught, it was a way of sort of praising the best books of all time. Today, and especially I'd say since about the 1960s on, it's very much shifted towards what's called a hermeneutics of critique or hermeneutics of suspicion. And a lot of this is informed by Marxism and its various offshoots. So the way literature is taught today is books are promoting oppressive ideologies, whether it's along lines of race, sex, capitalism. And the job of the literary critic, the professor in the classroom, and his students is to sort of unpack those ideologies and then challenge them. Audience capture effect is real, which is if you're someone who cares a lot about algorithms, if you're someone who really cares a lot about retweets and likes, especially because that's your whole income. I don't think Candace Owens has another job aside from just creating content. And you're seeing when I have a Holocaust denier on my podcast, or I interview Harvey Weinstein in prison, that is doing way better than me just offering sort of a measured critique of an economic policy. Then yeah, I think consciously or not, you're going to be incentivized to do more of that. People use change.org petitions now to get the attention of publishers and to get books canceled. And especially in the past decade, there's been so many controversies of quite literally books being canceled before publication, retracted from bookstores after publication. There's this whole new profession of what's called sensitivity readers, people hired to edit books for potentially insensitive material. So, to say that there's literary freedom in mainstream literary culture, and by that I mean the big houses like HarperCollins, Hachette, Penguin Random House, I think that's a tough case to be made.
All right, everybody, it's time for another episode of The Michael Shermer Show. I'm your host, as always, Michael Shermer. My guest today is Adam Zietella, who earned his PhD in English from the Department of Literatures at Cornell University. Before Cornell, he was a visiting fellow in the program of the study of capitalism at Harvard. Hey, that's good. He writes for the Washington Post, The Guardian, Newsweek, and other publications, and among other places, his writing has been honored by the Society for Features Journalism. Here's his new book. Actually, I think it's your first book, right?
First book,
and
yeah.
It's a great title. That book is Dangerous: How Moral Panic, Social Media, and the Culture Wars Are Remaking Publishing. That book is, it says it in slight light type there, racist, sexist, offensive, disgusting, and therefore dangerous. How are you? Nice to see you, Adam.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Michael. I appreciate it.
No, this is great. So you write about literature and stories, and so what's your story?
Yeah, so I sort of formally trained at the places that you talked about. I've always been an English guy. Also always have been someone very committed to free speech, to intellectual freedom, to literary freedom. And I kind of got interested in this topic because there have been a lot of book cancellations, especially over the past decade. And when I say cancellations, I'm not sort of speaking metaphorically like cancel culture. I'm talking literal cancellations of books, ostensibly in the name of anti-racism, feminism, what have you. So I got heavily into researching this topic while I was at Cornell and wrote my first book on it.
Have you had any pushback from any of your lit grit professors or mentors or colleagues?
Yeah, so I was very fortunate at Cornell. I sort of carved out my own space there as a PhD student. I don't know if it's the same now, but when I was admitted, I was told I would have no required coursework and I could study in any discipline I want. So I did my grad coursework in social psychology and sociology. I took courses in history, American studies, kind of found my people. So I had really supportive mentors. But yeah, there are people in English who absolutely hate me, for sure.
Really?
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I have told, I've been told I will never get a job in certain departments and things like that. Because in many ways, my book is not just a critique of book cancellations. It's sort of a trenchant critique of English departments and the direction they've gone in over the years.
Yeah, I just posted your book cover yesterday with a quote from it. This is you. While the right is remaking the world in its image, the left is standing in a circular firing squad. That's such a great turn of phrase.
Sure, yeah.
And Steve Pinker retweeted it and said, yes, this is the problem. Although he nuanced it by saying it's the far left attacking liberals, or the center left.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas, and the idea
Appreciate
is that the conservatives have, kind of circled the wagon and said, all right, we are one team and we're going to, stand strong against the libtards and all that. Whereas the left are kind of destroying themselves.
Yeah. It's funny because you asked me about my backgrounds, and so I'm 36. I came of age. I was around like 13 after 9/11, and my first encounter with the suppression of speech was really seeing a lot of my favorite bands at the time being censored on the radio. So I came out, like, I grew up listening to Rage Against the Machine, System of a Down, these sort of like far left Marxist anarchist bands that are like F America. And many of those bands were quite literally pulled from the radio station. So I had always associated the censorship with that Christian moral majority right post 9/11 moment. And then it was really, around about a decade and a half ago, where I started noticing, the phenomenon that would later be called wokeness or cancel culture or what have you.
Yeah, so that used to be a thing on the right, was censoring literature.
It still is, but yeah.
Right, and the stuff about the Teletubbies were gay and promoting the gay lifestyle and all this stuff. Yeah, and then it was always the left defending, free speech and lyrics, and Madonna protesting, or her songs with crucifixes and stuff like that. There was objections to it, and it was the left defending her, and now, if reading your book, it's like really disturbing how that has shifted. So, but before we get into all that, what's behind it, I didn't know you had such a background in social psychology and sociology. That's good, because that's what this book is really about, is really the kind of the social psychology and sociology of literature, not the literature itself. Right.
Yeah,
but how do you think about, what do lit crit people say literature is for? And then probably, like, what did they used to say it was for, and what do they say it's for now?
Yeah, so if you go like real back in the day, right? So early 20th century, a lot of the people who ended up in English departments, especially at prestigious places like Harvard, Cornell, Yale, Oxford, Cambridge, there was a tradition that you study the best works of all time, the works that are going to last, Shakespeare, Melville, etc. And the purpose of literature was sort of to like reveal the human condition, to show aesthetic beauty. And the way literature was taught, it was a very a way of sort of like praising the best books of all time. Today, that, and especially I'd say since like about the 1960s on, it's very much shifted towards what's called a hermeneutics of critique, or hermeneutics of suspicion. And a lot of this is informed by Marxism and its various offshoots. So the way literature is taught today is books are promoting, oppressive ideologies, whether it's along lines of race, sex, capitalism. And the job of the literary critic, the professor in the classroom, and his students is to sort of like unpack those ideologies and then challenge them. Or in, other cases, if you're teaching, say, a Ta-Nehisi Coates book or an Ibram X. Kennedy, then, the praiseworthy nature comes back. But for the most part, if you're taking a typical college English course, you're going to be doing a lot of moral critique of books. You're not really going to be talking about why a book is good. It's certainly not good in the sense of like beauty or aesthetics. Like that will make you sound, like someone who came out of like the 1930s at this point.
Yeah. It's one of Richard Dawkins' observations that I always enjoyed, is you could tell down to about the decade when a novel was written based on the language and descriptions of Jews and women and blacks.
For sure.
So, there's a point to that, right? I guess these built-in biases are just there as part of the culture in the water you swim in, and no one even notices it until somebody points it out. Okay, fair enough. So, you sort of acknowledge that in your book at the start.
Sure.
Okay, there's a role for some of this, but then it goes too far.
Yeah, so it's unquestionably true that, especially when you go back historically, books have had stereotypes about minorities. They've had stereotypes about women. They've used off-putting language. Like, none of that is debatable. I mean, we could debate the extent to which that has diminished, which in mainstream publishing has diminished quite dramatically, especially in the past couple of decades. So that's not the problem I'm interested in. The problem I'm interested in is sort of the problem of concept creep, in the sense that these definitions of what counts as a racist book, what counts as a sexist book, what counts as a transphobic book. I mean, those definitions have become so utterly expansive and contradictory, and more importantly, they've been buttressed by an enforcement mechanism, and that enforcement mechanism is social media, and not just the social media of Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, but also the social media of Goodreads, the social media of YouTube. People use change.org petitions now to get the attention of publishers and to get books canceled. And especially in the past decade, there's been so many controversies of quite literally books being canceled before publication, retracted from bookstores after publication. There's this whole new profession of what's called sensitivity readers, people hired to edit books for potentially insensitive material. So, to say that there's literary freedom in mainstream literary culture, and by that I mean the big houses like HarperCollins, Hachette, Penguin Random House, I think that's a tough case to be made in 2025.
And are these sensitivity readers and so forth mostly for fiction, or do they also do that for nonfiction?
So the way I sort of understand their history is they were actually originally used in Christian publishers, and brought on to weed out potentially offensive material to Christian readers. From there, they migrated to children's literature and what's called young adult literature, so like preteen, early teen literature. Now they're used across the spectrum for fiction, but increasingly, especially in the past 10 years, they've been brought into nonfiction. So nonfiction in the sense of a memoir, but also nonfiction in the sense of there's peer-reviewed journals that use sensitivity readers. In, I think it was 2017, the New York Times Union asked the New York Times to start hiring sensitivity readers. Glenn Greenwald actually wrote a great piece about it. And this is Glenn Greenwald who, uncovered the NSA Glenn Greenwald. And his point was like, as toxic as sensitivity readers are for novels, like they're indubitably toxic when you're talking about like editing the paper of record for, and again, it's not just like potentially offensive language. It's putting forth perspectives that are going to anger the people on the furthest edges of the left.
Yeah, I guess the question is how many people are actually offended now, and then how do you know? Because they're the ones most likely to speak out, particularly on social media. So famously, you could have 100 comments on a post, and 90 of them are super positive, and 10 are negative, or 9 are moderate, and 1 is super negative, and you feel, the negativity bias. You feel like that everybody hates me, or that's the one I remember the most. So I wonder if there's that effect.
Yeah, for sure. When you study this stuff, you actually start to, because I've basically been a social media gadfly for the 5 years I was working on this book, and I am someone has no social media. I have a Twitter account I've never posted on. I just use it.
I noticed that.
Yeah, I just it's not, there's other things I want to do with my time, but one thing you'll notice is, yes, this is a such a relatively small percentage of readers. And I know this because you can look at books that really generated controversy. So one is American Dirt. Controversy gets covered in the New York Times, the Washington Post. You would think that this is like some mass movement against this book. But then when you go to like the Amazon page, it's like, 4.6 stars. Like most normal people are just like, oh yeah, it's a good book. Or, maybe the book could have been better. But people aren't saying it's a sign of, the next Nazi regime. So this is a small handful of people, but importantly, it tends to be a small handful of highly educated people with a certain status credential in the field of literature. So some of the people igniting these bonfires are themselves New York Times bestselling authors. They're professors. They're people who have some degree of following. So for example, when Roxane Gay tweets about a book that she doesn't like, accusing it of racism or sexism or transphobia or whatever, and she's someone who's very much online, publishers are going to pay attention to that, not just because it's Roxane Gay, but also Roxane Gay has hundreds of thousands of followers. And those people will retweet, they'll send emails to the publisher, they'll start a change.org petition. So again, yeah, when you zoom out, it's a small percentage of people, but having spent years interviewing the people at the publishers, that really doesn't matter. All it takes is a relatively small portion of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, publishing Skeptic magazine periodically get angry letters, emails. I'm never donating to the Skeptic Society again, and I'm canceling my subscription. So I contact my database person. Is this person ever donated? No. Are they subscribers? No. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, sounds on point. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just astonishing. Yeah. So, yeah, okay, so you also make the point, if you hire a sensitivity reader and say, read through this manuscript and tell us if there's anything offensive or highly sensitive in it, how can they not find something? I mean, they're being paid to find something, so they're going to inevitably just force something to come out.
Yeah, there's a quote by the novelist Upton Sinclair, and it's hard to convince someone of something when their income depends on them not being convinced. So, yeah, I mean, what you just said is 100% true. What's also true is sensitivity readers, you often see them involved in the mob that is going after books. So one of the examples that I start my book off with is this novel was supposed to come out, this novel called Blood Air. It was written by a Chinese-American author who, as far as I can tell, is, clearly left of center and sort of fluent in the left discourse. And a sensitivity reader had accused her book of being racist. The publisher canceled the book. They sent it to sensitivity readers. They reissued it. But that sensitivity reader himself was a writer. And then the same thing happened to him where people went after him and said, you're not being sensitive enough, which is wild because his job is to be sensitive. But again, one thing you'll notice, it's the people who just economically stand to benefit from these book controversies who are often at the center of them. It's very similar to an arsonist selling fire insurance. And,
right.
It's not that big of a difference, to be honest.
Yeah, watching Jordan Peterson's career over the last decade since he first went on Rogan to complain about Bill C-16 in Canada, it's like every time something happens, I think, damn, I wish this would happen to me.
I know,
this would
right?
be great for book sales. Holy moly. It's all anybody talks about. And he says, I hate this. This is no good. It's like, oh, yeah, I know. But look at your book sales.
Yeah, same thing with Shane Gillis, too. Like, his first appearance on Rogan was after he got cut from SNL. And he was like, I thought my comedy career was over. And now he's hosted SNL twice.
Right. Yes, the band in Boston effect. Yeah, so back to your earlier point, though, I think even if it's a minority people complaining, there's a silencing effect on the majority who doesn't want to be canceled, right? So I've always made this point. I've been a college professor for decades, and also giving public talks at colleges and universities. When you go there, these are the most peaceful, quiet, bucolic places. You don't see rampaging, blue-haired, nose-ringed people protesting and so on. But if you tune on Fox News, I mean, back in Tucker Carlson's day, every week he had, here's our Thursday campus craziness video. And if you watch that, you think, well, oh my God, I don't even want to go to any of these campuses. But the effect is that, people see this and think, well, this must be what most people are doing, or I don't want to be subject to this, so I'm going to just keep my head down. And I do know some very famous older scientists who say, I don't want to get involved in any of this. Because I ask them, will you speak out about that? Oh, no. I don't even go on campus anymore. I keep my head down. I don't say anything. I go, wow, okay.
Yeah. No, I agree with you 100%. I think that's a great point. From my perspective, I think two things can simultaneously be true. So I taught a course called Culture Wars at Cornell. I had black students in that course. I had a trans student in that course. I had a student who on their laptop had a sticker that said abolish ICE. So, I mean, this was, there was far left people in that class. And, I taught Tucker Carlson in that class. I taught his special campus craziness. I taught Peterson. I taught Jonathan Haidt. I taught these people who are very critical of these liberal orthodoxies. like I was fine. I had great T-vals. Like I won a teaching award after that semester. So it was like, yeah, students can think, they can debate. That's true. On the other hand, I've seen Tucker's show when he was doing it. My friends used to be like, he cherry picks the most extreme people. And from my personal experiences, especially when I was at Cornell and Harvard, which I think are sort of like festers for some of this stuff, I've met more extreme people. Like if Tucker like shot me an email, I could introduce him to some like truly crazy people. And some of these people have tenure and they have an influence. So like there are for sure nut jobs in enormously powerful positions, especially when you're talking about academia. But to your point, most people are pretty reasonable, and they're not these whack jobs who are trying to like shut down Ann Coulter when she comes to Cornell.
Or Milo Yiannopoulos.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that brings up the question, to what extent are people like Milo Yiannopoulos or Ann Coulter or more recently Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson on his podcast, do they really believe a lot of this crazy stuff they're saying? Like Candace yesterday was tweeting about Joseph Mengele at Auschwitz could not possibly have done these things. I mean, this is completely crazy. How would anybody, cut open some twins and stitch them together and change their eye color? It's like, yeah, but he did that. I mean, have you read what Jeffrey Dahmer did to his victims? I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but they're crazy people.
Yeah.
Does she really believe that, or is this performance and to get clickbait?
Yeah, I've maybe watched 45 seconds of Candace Owens in my entire life, so I can't speak to her specifically, but I think there's certainly just people who are like lack the cognitive capacity to like make sense of the world, especially people who tend to be more prone to like contrarian arguments or like alternative history or what have you. I think that's a certain personality type. I do also think the audience capture effect is real, which is like, if you're someone who cares a lot about algorithms, if you're someone who really cares a lot about retweets and likes, especially because that's your whole income. Like, I don't think Candace Owens has another job aside from just creating content. And you're seeing like, oh, when I have a Holocaust denier on my podcast, or I interview Harvey Weinstein in prison, like that is doing way better than me just offering sort of like a measured critique of an economic policy. Then yeah, I think consciously or not, you're going to be incentivized to do more of that.
Yeah. I remember when all the campuses were losing their minds over Milo Yiannopoulos' appearances. And, I do a lot of public speaking at college campuses. You know what's worse than protesters coming? Nobody coming to your talk, right? So, I mean, if they just ignored him, he would hate it. It's like, please protest, right? I mean, that's kind of the point of a lot of this.
I remember seeing, sorry.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to remember, I remember like the Charles Murray brouhaha at,
right.
UVM, or what was the selective liberal arts college out there?
Yeah, Middlebury, I think.
Middlebury, yeah. I remember looking into that, and it was like his talk was originally scheduled for a room that only seated like 70 people or something. Because they're like, how many people knew who Charles Murray was? How many people were going to go there? But because they, put on this huge like performative brouhaha, all of a sudden Charles Murray's like on Sam Harris the next week, and he's on Tucker, and it's like, yeah, if you just ignored him, that probably would have gone like most university talks, which is 13 to 22 people in the audience, and that's sort of it.
Yeah. So I'll ask you a similar question to what I've asked about some of the corporate wokeness. To what extent does Disney really believe a lot of the stuff that they're pushing out in their content, or are there, behind closed doors, the guys with the green shades going, all right, well, for market share, we got to do this and this and this. We know it's a bunch of bullshit. I don't know the answer to this question. You've interviewed top people in the publishing world at the big five publishing houses, who have caved into some of this stuff. Did they really believe it? Are they social justice warriors in their mind? Like, we are really going to affect change and this is going to be good for the world? Or are they more bottom line, or is it a mix of motives?
Yeah, I think it's for sure a mix of motives, both in publishing as well as places like Disney, right? Because to push back on people who are like, this is only cynical economics, like these people think whatever, the woke stuff is super popular, so we're going to run like a Gillette ad criticizing toxic masculinity, or we're going to remove the 80-year-old guy from the Cracker Barrel logo or whatever. I mean, those people are real, but on the flip side, there are true believers, and the true believers actually, I think, tend to occupy positions of power in public relations and in the media and the arts. So, like, when you look at, say, the editorial board of the New York Times, or when you look at who's acquiring books at Penguin Random House, HarperCollins, it's not like these people are being culled from the community college in southern Iowa. They all tend to come from like the same 24 to 50 universities in the US, plus maybe like Oxford and Cambridge if someone's studying, abroad. And it's like, well, what do you learn if you take sociology at Yale? Like, what do you learn if you take English at Princeton? You do get inculcated in a certain way of looking at the world that very much aligns with the idea that Gillette can push back on toxic masculinity by like critiquing men, in advertisement. So for me personally, having talked to people in publishing, yeah, there are for sure true believers. But the bigger problem is the people, especially the people who have positions of power, who utterly cannot stand this stuff, who just keep their mouths shut, because they're in many ways incentivized to just keep their mouth shut.
Yeah. Well, another observation I've made since I've been in the publishing world for decades is the every single email I get from everyone at all my publishers is they have the pronouns in their bio line. And I haven't spoken out to them like, why are you doing this? Because I think I know why. It's kind of a virtue signaling, or I want to do something. I want to do my little part. So, and the broader question for you would be something like, after George Floyd, we all watched the video, and it's just awful. It's infuriating. Like, I want to do something. Most of us can't do anything, right? What am I going to do? Well, I'm a writer, or you're an editor, or you're a screenwriter, or you make cartoons for Disney or whatever. Okay, in my little corner of the world, I can do this one little thing here, so I'm going to push that out. So I feel like, I'm helping part of this problem.
Yeah, no, I honestly couldn't frame it better myself. I think there's a direct correlation between right-wing political power and the left-wing culture wars, in the sense when the right-wing political power ascends, as it did, under Donald Trump, people on the left, right, a lot of the controversies I look at, they quite literally happened at a moment when Republicans control the Oval Office, the Supreme Court, the Senate, the House. Now they have a trifecta, the majority of state legislatures, the majority of governorships. So if you're like a true believer, if you're left of center and you're seeing this and you're like, oh my God, what's happening to immigrants? Oh my God, what's happening to trans people? You're not going to change any of those institutions. So I think there is sort of like, not to get too Freudian, like a kind of repressive desublimation, where it's like it all of a sudden it gets funneled into, well, I can't get Trump out of office, but I can get that quote unquote racist book off the bookshelves, or I can do this. Mm-hmm. I think that's a genuine belief, and that is the belief that is very widely taught in the humanities and social sciences, not just at the elite institutions, but really across the board. It's this idea that there's a very strong relationship between culture and language on the one hand, and then everything from economics to genocide on the other.
By the way, you mentioned Cracker Barrel. By the end, how these culture wars change so fast. By the end of my bike ride this morning, my buddy looks on his phone and goes, "Oh, the Cracker Barrel people are going back to the old logo." I went, wow, that was fast. That was like a 24-hour turnaround.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think, I watched South Park. They had a new season there a few weeks ago, and the first episode they said woke is dead, and they critiqued Trump. It's definitely dead in certain corners. Like, woke is very much not alive in the Oval Office right now. And it is interesting that Cracker Barrel did a flip. It's also interesting that, was it Old Navy, the jeans people who got blowback for promoting eugenics or something?
American Eagle jeans.
Yeah.
Sydney Sweeney has great jeans. Yeah. Oh, my God. It's astonishing how these things blow up so fast.
Yeah, so I think like maybe 5 years ago, like they could have very well issued an apology and said, we're so sorry for promoting Hitler, whatever it was. But from my understanding, they've just sort of continued on as normal. So I think in some ways, there has been a shift. I also think, the response to my book is sort of indicative of a change. Like, I thought my book was going to get torched by places like the Washington Post. And I think it would have been torched if it came out in like peak kind of wokeness, like 2016 or something like that. But so far it's like the Washington Post is praising it. I was on the BBC a few days ago.
Oh, nice.
I'm actually kind of bummed out. They're actually, I'm not like tooting my own horn, but there hasn't been a negative review. But I think if the book came out, again during Trump's first term in office, people would have been saying that book is dangerous, which I kind of thought, which is why I named it that, because I was like, this is going to be hilarious if I get accused of also being dangerous. They're going to have to write that.
Right. Like Dave Rubin's book, burn this book.
Yeah. Like, burn
please,
this.
somebody.
Yeah. There's a book. Have you ever read Randall Kennedy has a book, and the title is just the N-word, and it's about the history of that.
Right.
When that book came out, there were some people on the left who were burning that book. And I always thought it was, profoundly ironic because, Randall is not some sort of he's black dude who's, as I understand it, left of center, teaches at Harvard, but they're like burning the N-word in, I guess, some sort of like progressive demonstration.
Well, that's the epigram to your book. There is more than one way to burn a book, and the world is full of people running about with lit matches. Ray Bradbury, Coda to Fahrenheit 451. People do know what that title means, right? Or has that been lost? The temperature at which books burn?
Yeah. I don't know if people know that, but yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, apology. So, you have such great examples in here. Let's see. This is, you're writing about the devil's loose in Salem. Mr. Proctor provoked a ritual of public shaming reminiscent of the Crucible and the Scarlet Letter and so on. Let me get the context here. Jessica Clues learned what the scaffold of the pillory feels like. The next day she apologized. Anyway, I just want to read this apology because it's so typical and why you shouldn't even bother because it only infuriates people. I'm writing to apologize for a thread I tweeted yesterday. I take full responsibility for my unprovoked anger toward Lorena Kerman and the impact of my words on her and all who read them. I neither expect nor will ask for anyone's forgiveness or to engage with me further regarding this issue. I want to acknowledge the pain I caused and to apologize sincerely for it. My words were misguided, wrong, and deeply hurtful. I must and will do better moving forward. Anyway, so again, I'm deeply sorry. I'll strive to do better. Okay. I mean, these are so lame. I mean, you might as well just ask Grok or ChatGPT, please write me an apology letter, and you'll get something like that.
I'm pretty sure I have an endnote that says these apologies are so formulaic, like AI
you do.
could
Yes,
produce
you do.
them or something like that. But they actually are. There's usually like the acknowledgement of harm. It's never an acknowledgement of like, I'm sorry I offended like some people or something. It's usually like this loaded language. I'm sorry for the harm, sorry for the violence. There's always the promise to do better. That's a very common word, do better. There's also, my favorite is when people get ransacked by the mob and they're not even sure why they're being a target, but they'll say something like, it's not my job for you to like educate me or to like whatever, steal your emotional labor. Like, I'm gonna do my own homework and I guess like figure out like why you called me a racist. But right. Yeah, there's so many, and not just from authors. There's been reviewers who have apologized because they'll positively review a book and then the book gets torched by social media and then the reviewer sort of throws themselves under the bus and they apologize for writing a positive review. It really is some of the most craven people involved in this culture.
And then you followed up with her agent, who then issues an apology. I thank everyone who took it upon themselves to bring the recent tweets of my client, Jessica Clues, to my attention. I also apologize for taking so long to publicly respond. Apologize for your late apology. And I felt obligated to speak directly with my client first. Oh, come on. And let me be clear, her behavior yesterday in which she made a series of condescending and personal attacks, blah, 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 blah. I mean, okay, so does anybody reading this go, oh, well, that's a good apology, then, okay, we forgive you or whatever? Does it work?
No. I mean, I'm not trying to give advice to people who might end up in a sort of brouhaha like this, but I will give advice, which is if you actually didn't do anything wrong, which most people didn't, I would not apologize. Because, like, one thing I've noticed, just practically speaking, is when these people issue an apology, the apology itself then becomes criticized. So I'll give you two examples. So just to give your listeners some context. So the example you're talking about, there was an author named Jessica Clues, and there was this sort of social justice warrior person online who said we shouldn't be reading anything published before 1950 because it's racist, it's sexist. And Jessica, in a sort of snarky way, was like, that's absolutely preposterous. Like, there's a ton of good literature, including literature published by Black people before then. And in response, because Jessica was white, the person she was criticizing was a Black woman who has a lot of standing in this culture. Jessica got accused of racism, of trying to shut up a Black woman. So the apology that you just read is her apology. But one thing that happened was after she wrote that apology, people went after the apology. Quite literally, someone screenshotted it, a teacher, and then marked it up with red ink and crossed out like, I'm sorry for what I said, to I'm sorry for violent racism. I'm sorry for this. Even the agent, he ended up issuing another apology because his apology was deemed insufficient. And she ended up losing her agent. I don't think she's written any books since. There's another apology, one of my favorites. So The Nation, which is a very left of center magazine that's been around since the abolition period. Yeah. They published a poem by this kid, Anders Carlson Wee. And the poem got accused of being blackface, of doing all this stuff. John McWhorter wrote a great essay about it, just kind of pointing out how those accusations had no merit. But anyways, the poet ended up apologizing. And in his apology, he said, thank you for opening my eyes to racism or whatever. And literally the first comment on the apology is like, this is ableist BS, like the metaphor of eyes. And it's just like, these are, some of these people, they're just absolute wolves. And if you give them some meat, they're going to keep biting and keep going after you. But the positive is, a lot of these people also have extraordinarily low attention spans. So if you just sort of ignore them, they'll move on to posting about cats or, whatever else they're doing.
Right. That's what famously Trader Joe's did when they got mobbed for their Trader Jose's line of Mexican food. And they got mobbed. And they basically said, well, we considered your criticisms and we're not changing anything. Thank you very much. Goodbye and good luck. And then like with a week later, it was a non-event.
Yeah,
they just moved on.
There's been some universities like that where, like a university president is responding to demands and he's just like, no. And then it's like 3 days later, this clearly isn't big enough. This isn't like the new civil rights struggle. So it's not like these people are super invested in it, like fighting for their freedom or the right to vote. It's like, oh, we were upset because the campus dining hall served like Indian food and the president says he's not changing it. So I guess we're just going to continue to eat Indian food.
Right. That happened at Chapman University a few years ago when I was teaching my critical thinking class. They have statues around the campus. Margaret Thatcher, Ayn Rand. Oh boy.
Oh boy.
Yeah. I mean, at least they're women, right? But even that's not enough. Anyway, there was a little movement to take the statues down, and President Daniele Strupa, who was my boss, said, yeah, we consider, he wrote this thoughtful email. We've thoughtfully given consideration to your concerns, and we're just going to stick with what we have. Yeah. And it was like, that was it. It was over. They just stopped protesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, you quote here, I want to read this from your book, John McWhorter. White people calling themselves our saviors, for those who don't know, John is Black, make black people look like the dumbest, weakest, most self-indulgent human beings in the history of our species, and teach black people to revel in that status and cherish it as making us special. Unbelievable. Then you quote him from another MFA, Masters of Fine Arts, right? Program.
Yeah.
Is that what? Yeah. Illustrates McWhorter's point. This is now you quoting. I'm not sure who it is. I think a lot of your quotes are anonymous, right? Because people don't want to be.
Yeah.
Even that, I'll tell you what's really going on and how I really feel, but you can't quote me. What? Okay. Anyway, we had a black writer turn in this truly beautiful essay. Everybody was so admiring of it. We were in the complimentary phase of the workshop, and the professor said, "This is just such an ambitious thing you've brought in. It's taking on so many different topics, and it's so exciting." Then one of the other students, a white student, made a point of stopping the professor and saying, "Just so you know, the word ambitious, especially when applied to women and people of color, is deeply insulting, because you're saying that she's sort of stepping beyond her capabilities and that she's trying to do more than she's capable of as a black woman," close quote from that protester. After, the professor spent 2 minutes doing the standard penance, but everyone's so uptight after that because you're like, Jesus, this guy just complimented her writing. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's an anecdote from like a top MFA program. So for people who might not be like super into this culture, like basically if you want to be a writer, especially a novelist, a poet, the two paths are kind of, you can go to NYC and bust tables for 10 years while you're writing, try to make it that way. An increasingly more common path is you go to an MFA program, particularly an elite one, and you get a couple years to work on your craft while getting some funding to teach undergrads. But the basic structure of the MFA program is the workshop. So you're going to be in a room with other graduate students reading each other's work. And this anecdote comes from someone in that classroom and just seeing what happens. Because as we all know, calling a black woman's work ambitious has to signify that there's some racism at work.
Unbelievable. Yeah. I was going to show this video clip, but I think we'd get defunded or they'd cancel this episode because it's from the New York Times. It's a video short called "Here's What Cancel Culture Looked Like in 1283." Have you seen this?
No.
Oh, it's hilarious. It's actually a really good send-up and surprising from the New York Times. But anyway, it's a little like 3-minute video with actors in which they're hauling this woman through the muck because she has been sentenced to be publicly canceled by having thy head smoked, shut out on the bog pile of shame for the crime of saying something offensive 11 years ago. And then the crowd goes, yeah, 11 years ago. Let's judge past statements by present day perspective. It's like saying the same thing today, kinda. And then she says, don't I get a trial? And the crowd yells, no, this is a canceling. No due process. We are the jury. Our anger makes us qualified. Plus, we're all perfect. And then they all chant, we're all perfect, right? And then the judge person says, you may be granted a reprieve if you apologize. She says, of course I apologize. I'm sorry you were offended. Sorry that we were offended? That's a non-apology. That's worse than saying nothing. Well, if apologizing makes it worse, what's the point of apologizing at all? Oh, she hates apologizing. Cancel her even more. This goes on and on like
Amazing.
This.
Yeah,
and then the judge guy said, yeah.
You don't ever, if you're apologizing, want to say, I'm sorry for offending you.
Right, because that puts it on them, right?
Yeah, and it's like, in these people's minds, what you've done is violence, harm, dehumanizing them. So for you to just say, like, I'm sorry I offended you, it sort of shatters their narrative. I'm sure you've seen the video of Nicholas Christakis at Yale, like, surrounded by the there's a moment in the video where he says, like, you know, I'm sorry you were offended by what my wife said. And you see, like, their faces of these students, like, they just get so, they're like, what? You're just saying, like, we have hurt feelings or something, as opposed to, like, you have done, like, irreparable harm, you know, in a racist vein.
Yeah, I mean, so they're often described as these snowflakes that are weak and meek and so on, but they actually seem pretty violent and very aggressive. They don't seem snowflakish at all.
Yeah, I use this term in my book. It's kind of funny to me. It's militant fragility, and it's like
I love that term. Oh my
it's
God,
a
it's so
it's
good.
a yeah, it's a combination. It's like the one clever term I came up with, but it's a combination of, on the one hand, like just this hypersensitivity, hyper emotional vulnerability. Like I often joke, like many of the leftists I've met in my life who just reduce politics to like their passing feelings and stuff, like these are the very last people I would ever want to do like real political work with. Like these people like are not waging a revolution or anything if you can absolutely destroy them with like a Halloween costume. So they're hypersensitive, but they have this like very militant, confrontational way of expressing their hypersensitivity. So like in the Christakis video, there's literally a student who gets in his face, and there's other students who are like, shut your mouth, don't talk. One of my favorites is when Brett Weinstein was getting ousted from Evergreen State. The president of the university is in a room with students, and they're just all talking down to him. And at one point, he's like, I have to go to the bathroom. And one's like, you're not going to the bathroom. And he's like, I have to go to the bathroom. And one's like, we'll escort you. So it's like, it takes the sort of imagery and the aesthetic of, like 1960s Black Power activism with like the guns and stuff. But at the end of the day, they're not like arguing for rights or like the abolition of slavery. It's just like, Brett Weinstein like sent an email I didn't like. Yeah, it's fascinating to me because like my personal background, like my parents did not go to college. My dad, growing up, he had a devil tattooed on his arm and like a bloodthirsty grizzly bear on his forearm. It was like a very distinct culture of like working class Boston. And like in that culture, if I'm a grown man and some 18-year-old kid gets in my face and tells me I can't go to the bathroom to like keep my mouth shut, like you're gonna get knocked out. Yeah, it's but like in these spaces where you have a certain type of person who ends up being president of Evergreen State College, you have a certain type of like customer clientele in the form of students, like that stuff, which looks like some sort of SNL sketch, that passes as, I guess, acceptable, not just acceptable behavior in these people's minds, but like they're doing like, I guess, really important political work by intimidating Brett Weinstein.
Yeah. Well, it's a point that Jonathan Haidt made about the shift in the goals or the telos of universities from the search for truth to social justice. So if that really is your goal, then, what are you going to do? Well, we don't care about what Brett Weinstein's teaching about biology and the search for truth about natural selection and human behavior or whatever, because he's into evolutionary psych stuff. But instead, what it is that you said about not coming to campus, that you object to that, and then they lose their minds. Or that woman in the Christakis video who said, it was like literally, this is our home. Your job is to make our home safe and comfortable. It's like, no, that
is a verbatim quote. Yeah.
Yeah. College, you don't go to college. That's not your home. That's not what's going on here. But maybe that's what they think it is now.
Yeah. I don't know if Nicholas Christakis meditates for like 2 hours a day or what, but that man has an astonishing degree of patience.
And he's politically very liberal. They're attacking one of their own. This is back to the beginning point. Republicans would never do this to each other, or maybe they would. I don't know, but it doesn't seem like they are now.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the landmark achievements of the right in the U.S. is, especially in the latter half of the 20th century, like they were able to unite the fiscal conservatives with the Christian conservatives under this sort of like big tent umbrella, and they've always been very good about, at the end of the day, we're trying to win elections. So that's why you have someone like Ted Cruz, who, Donald Trump insulted his wife, but at the end of the day, Ted Cruz is coming out to make sure Donald Trump's president. Trump called, Marco Rubio, little Marco Rubio, made fun of him. At the end of the day, Marco Rubio is coming out for President Trump. On the left, it's like, if a candidate tweeted something about a movie in 2009 that you didn't like, then you're not coming out to vote. It's wild.
You would think that they would be thinking about course correcting now away from all this stuff. Even if they really believe it, the polls consistently show the vast majority of Americans are not into the DEI, cancel culture, woke, trans stuff at all. So you would think just sort of pragmatically to get votes, they'd say, okay, let's ratchet this down a little bit here. But they seem to be doubling down.
Yeah, and it seems like they're at least many of them are retaining their commitment to this stuff. At the same time, they're trying to like have their cake and eat it too. Like, I don't know if you saw the New York Times article where it said Democratic donors had invested $20 million in essentially trying to create a liberal Joe Rogan.
You
Like
had him. He was a liberal.
You had him, yeah. This guy was talking about universal basic income, and
he loved Bernie. He had Bernie on.
It was Bernie, bro, yeah. And it's like, if you paid me $400, I could have solved this problem for you. I don't think we need 20 million. It's just like, maybe don't lead with positions that alienate a wide spectrum of voters.
Right. Or, to be a man's man, you have to curse a lot. No, sorry, that isn't it. Or, Gavin Newsom's taken to
what do you make
tweet.
of that?
I think they just don't understand what, masculinity. Well, they've lost the thread on what masculinity is. They think it's this toxic masculinity in which you have to, like yell and scream at women and drag them around by their hair and shoot animals and I don't know what, something like that. That's not it. And it's not, and the opposite, drinking light beer with Dylan Mulvaney, that's also not it, right? Yeah. Or the, Tim Waltz, tampon Tim, that's not it either. Or, Gavin Newsom issuing these tweets that are exactly like Trump's. The same lengths, obviously, he's just trying to beat Trump. It's like, you can't beat Trump. Don't try to beat Trump. Nobody should try to beat Trump. Just be yourself, but don't be a soy boy. That's also not going to. I mean, your dad would not vote for a soy boy, I gather, from what you described.
Highly improbable.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, I was like, towards the end of his life, he had some, like, I think early onset Alzheimer's and stuff. That might have been an opportunity for the Democrats to slip in there. But yeah, and it's like, again, I don't think my dad was some sort of outlier. It's like, if you read, there's a deluge of books and interviews with just ordinary people and ordinary men in particular. And it's like, you don't need to invest $20 million to figure this out. This isn't some like political enigma that we can't get to the bottom of. It's like, just look at some basic public opinion data. Like, I don't know, go to your local powerlifting gym, like have a conversation with a 19-year-old kid. It should become pretty obvious pretty quickly why someone like Donald Trump's appealing and why someone like, Kamala Harris, might not be as appealing.
Yeah. Well, back to Jordan Peterson. I mean, people that are critical of him, they just can't seem to look at what the phenomenon is objectively and say, what is it that these young men especially find appealing about him? The rhetoric is just, well, he's a racist and they're racist. No, that isn't it. You've completely missed the thread here. Just watch some of his interviews or his podcasts. I mean, he's a true believer. He's not promoting some, right-wing Nazi program, and just see what it is. Just try to understand that. People don't get it.
Yeah, for sure. And there's enormous degrees of difference between someone like Jordan Peterson and, say, someone like Andrew Tate, who I know Jordan has been highly critical of, but to people who like really don't care what Jordan Peterson is saying, who really don't care what Andrew Tate is saying, and they're just trying to churn out an 800-word article for BuzzFeed. Like, all those guys are just the same. They're all misogynistic. They're all, people who are psychologically repressed because they're telling men to sort of like be tough and to act in the face of feelings and stuff. And it's unfortunate in many ways, not the least of which is, that's, again, like, I think part of the explanation for why the left side of the political spectrum is having a hard time connecting to, a not insignificant political demographic.
Yeah. Well, one of the, the common threads in Jordan's work is really basic self-help stuff, like Tony Robbins kind of.
For sure.
Or, in the 1990s, that kind of men's movement of just basic stuff, like just get a job, have some goals, pursue a career, get married, have kids, really basic. Now that's considered, that's that crazy right-wing conservative stuff. It's like, that used to be what pretty much everybody believed.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's that hasn't gotten out of fashion in middle of America. It might have gone out of fashion in, the masthead of the Washington Post or Yale or whatever, like people who control media and can give a certain glimpse. But, I lift out of powerlifting gym. I do jujitsu like that. That's Jordan Peterson's popular among normal people. Like, what does his book sell? 12 million copies. And like,
Right.
It's not some esoteric, like right-wing broadside. It's, he's got a chapter called Clean Your Room. Okay.
Yeah, right.
Connects with people.
I remember when I first heard all that, it's like, really, you need to be told these things? Apparently, maybe a lot of young men do. Maybe they don't have dads, or maybe their dads are soy boy type guys, and they're afraid to parent or have strict rules in the house. Maybe it's something like that, and they grow up and go, "Wow, I'm lost," and then they encounter Jordan. They go, "Oh my God, I've seen again."
Yeah, and I think like me personally, I think in many ways I'm like sort of a caricature of toxic masculinity in terms of my interests, kind of how I live my life. But I listen to Jordan Peterson when I'm like on a run. I listen to Joe Rogan. I know Joe Rogan will listen to like Jocko, who he considers like even more of sort of like a hardcore dude than him. And it's like,
yes,
I think it's like showering. Like I get inspired by many of these guys. I get motivated. And I'm someone like, I'm not at home like playing video games and jerking off. Like I'm out there doing stuff, but I still like, I don't always want to go to the gym. And frankly, Jordan Peterson's a great speaker too. I like listening to him, and he can monologue for a seemingly insurmountable amount of time.
Yeah, he's become a bit loquacious in recent years, where he just, like on his podcast, he talks like 80%, 90% of the time.
Yeah.
Not that he doesn't have interesting things to say. He does. It's just, anyway.
Can you imagine because I don't think he practices clinically anymore, but I know he did at some point. And I used to think
sitting there as
like,
a paying client while Jordan talks for 50 minutes.
I'm like, if I go to him with, I'm like depressed, and like he just assigns me Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. Like,
let me tell you the story of the dragon. Your problem is your dragon. What? I have a dragon?
I would have loved to be a fly on the wall of some of those clinical sessions.
Yeah, I've been to a couple of his public shows, and they are very entertaining. And you get the sense that he's not giving a canned lecture like a lot of public speakers. They're just doing their TED Talk type thing where it's all programmed. George just comes out and he starts talking, and I suspect a lot of the time he doesn't know what he's going to say until he starts.
For sure, yeah. And you brought up Gavin Newsom earlier. I think, I'm kind of just spitballing here, but I do think there's something about masculinity that is valued in its authenticity. It's sort of being yourself, being willing to stand by values, perspectives, regardless of whether you face backlash for them. And like Peterson's a great example of that. I think Joe Rogan's a great example of that. When I see Gavin Newsom sort of coming out of left field and trying to do the sort of like transgressive male thing, it'd be different if he was like that, and that's what he's been doing for decades. But it just seems like he, hired 3 pollsters straight out of like Oberlin College who were like, and he was like, how do I be cool? Like, how do I get on the Nelk boys like Trump? And they're like, you got to be funny, you got to be transgressive. It just doesn't hit. It's the equivalent of like a guy who doesn't have a lot of muscle who walks into a room with like his arms out like that, and it's like, dude, that's not you, man. Like, just put the arms down.
That's so funny. Yeah, I like Jocko Willink. I don't know him personally, but I used to show my class his video "Good." That one, the little 3 minutes.
Whenever like, this terrible
something bad happens, I
good.
want you to say "Good." Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Didn't get the job? Good. Get a better job. So
yeah.
You didn't get into the college. This is what I tell my students. You didn't get into the college you wanted? Good. You got it at this college, which is the best. You didn't get the classes you wanted, and you got my class? Good. And so on.
Yeah, for sure.
But for a lot of the kids I'm showing this video, he's kind of a bro, and there, I could tell there was like, ooh, this is toxic masculinity. It's like, no, this is just kind of basic stuff, right? Have some goals. If you don't make them, just get back up and keep going. And write them down. And, his whole book, I read his book, Discipline Equals Freedom, I think was the title.
Yeah.
and that everyone's looking for a hack. What's the secret to getting up early and working out? Get up early and work out. Yeah, but how do you do it? Get up early and work out. Well, but isn't there some hack? No, just get up and do it. Oh.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the only hacks there would be like I set out my workout clothes the night before because I know I'm going to be a little groggy and forgetful in the morning, but that's about it, really. I mean, you just have to do it. So maybe a lot of young men have just not been inculcated into that culture, particularly if you aren't into sports or the military or something like that, and you're not getting it at home. You're not going to get it at school. So, yeah.
And, a question that I would have is like, what is the alternative to that? So if you think Peterson or Jocko telling people to persevere and to have like a certain degree of emotional toughness in the sense of like life is always going to throw challenges at you and it's sort of how you respond to them that defines you. Like, what is the alternative that to say you have, I mean, this is sort of like getting into the Jonathan Haidt kind of like coddling thing, but what's the alternative to say that you yourself don't have control over your own emotions and to give that power to other people? Is it to say, I'll never succeed because capitalism is an unjust system that only rewards the rich, so I'm just going to be, poor? I don't know. It's not a surprise to me that these people who personify this stuff are very popular.
Yeah, like Ibram X. Kendi's books. I've read a few of those, and some of the other authors who I guess Jonathan Haidt would describe as being part of the victimhood culture. And the theme, I mean, the message is so depressing. You have no chance of making it in America because of its racism. Even if you think the people you're engaged with are tolerant and friendly and nice to you and giving you the chance, deep down, unconsciously, there's systemic racism at work here, unconscious racism. The banking system is against you, and the job system's against you. I mean, how do you even get up out of bed in the morning, get out and engage in the world, which even if you have everything going for you, it's still hard.
Yeah, and I think one irony of that is a lot of the people pushing those narratives through this leftist framework are people who clearly have some degree of work ethic, and Ibram X. Kennedy's, Ibram X. Kennedy has built a career on casting America as this land of injustice where, black people are never going to rise and stuff. And it's like, this dude, like a ticket to one of his talks costs like $86 or something. Right. Like he has an endowed chair at BU and wrote like 5 New York Times bestsellers. Like,
yes.
I have a line in my book. I don't disagree with it, but it is kind of sharp, which is the best thing to happen to Ibram X. Kennedy's career was George Floyd's death. Since that he was on the what are the 10 books you need to read to like fight racism? Like it's just insane that, there's a certain like alchemy that's at work here, which is when a poor black person gets shot by the police and, these leftist academics churn out a book around it or op-eds or a series of speaking engagements, they're sort of, I don't think they're like evil people, but objectively they're sort of converting that death into profits for themselves. Like Ibram X. Kennedy makes way more money than most Americans, and that's just a fact. Mm-hmm. And it's also a fact that no one had heard of that guy before George Floyd, and people were like, how can I undo the racism in my own life? And it's like, here you have this guy who's telling you the most important thing you can do is confess your racism. Like he literally wrote that in a children's book.
Yeah, so depressing. Well, how did you make it then? If there's no chance of black people making it, then how did you do it?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, you mean you worked hard and set goals and so on and so. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you see that thing from the African American History Museum a few years ago where they produced a handout with the help of Robin DiAngelo? I think it was the Smithsonian Museum for African American History or something, but their handout was them trying to delineate the difference between white culture and African American culture. But it just recreated like the very worst stereotypes about black people, and it was like white culture is I'm not even making this up, like there's no comedic hyperbole here. It's white culture is showing up on time, it's objective thinking,
Oh, I do remember
it's
that, yes.
delayed gratification, and then it's like, okay, African American culture is like giving into like instinctual emotions and like arriving late and like choosing to think subjectively over objectively, and it was just like,
Right. I mean, yeah, it's really a racist thing to say this is what black people are like.
yeah. I mean, that's what the sensitivity readers do in my book, who are brought on. You know, the only criteria to be a sensitivity reader is to share an identity with a marginalized group. So if like I'm a white guy and I have a black character in my book, like my publisher might be like, we need to bring on a black sensitivity reader. And even though they'll sort of use some Orwellian rhetorical maneuvers to say this isn't what they do, what they essentially do is to say a black person would never talk like this, a black person would never eat this, a black person would never act like that. But to make that statement, you're essentially homogenizing, you know, in the case of African Americans, like 41 million people. And you're often just recreating stereotypes, because you're saying like, oh, an African American family wouldn't eat whatever Asian ramen noodles for dinner. They would be eating like collard greens. And it's like, okay, what's the difference between what you said and like the stereotypes perpetuated in like a Tyler Perry film?
Okay, another thing I wanted to ask you before our time runs out here. So what to do about wokeness and all this stuff that you write about in the book. So you have the people like yourself, Jonathan Haidt, Steve Pinker, me, you know, we're going to fight the battle of ideas. We're going to combat these crazy ideas with more rational ideas and so on. Chris Rufo's position, he's been on the show. I was just with him at a conference in England about this very subject. In particular, it was the DEI statements that professors have to sign to get a job, and basically loyalty statements, and that we're all against this. Okay, what should we do about it? And, you know, it's like, we have to have a petition and we're all going to sign a statement and, you know, we're going to publish this statement. And Chris Rufo was there and he's like, guys, you've lost that battle. The only way to combat this is from the top down with laws. And that's what we're going to do. He did that in Florida with DeSantis. Now he's doing it with Trump. I don't know. What are your thoughts on how to, you know, kind of counter this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely like a case by case basis, certain thing, sort of thing. But I will say, at least as higher education goes, you know, I've only been in it about like 15 years, including my undergrad. But, you know, I had never seen any substantive changes at the universities that I have been at. I had actually only seen things get worse along the lines that concern people like me and you and Chris. It really wasn't until Donald Trump started pulling funding and threatening to pull funding that all of a sudden, you know, Cornell doesn't have a DEI office anymore and Harvard doesn't have mandatory diversity statements. Now, like, obviously on the flip side of that is people like doing cancer research and stuff have lost funding. And, you know, Trump was essentially wielding a sledgehammer that took out a lot of things instead of like a more fine-tooth instrument. But I don't know. I am sympathetic to Chris's point, at least on that issue. Am I saying like I fully endorse Trump cutting whatever $800 million to this university or whatever? No, but I concur with him that I'm not sure like open letters and some of those things, especially changes like from dissident academics within the university. Those, I don't know. I haven't personally seen those be very successful.
Okay, other topics. Since you write about moral panics, what is a moral panic? I don't want to be part of that, but on the other hand, there are issues we should be concerned about.
Yeah, for sure. So it's one of those things that's kind of like obscenity, you know, famous saying, I know it when I see it. Right. Sociologists who sort of specialize in moral panics, like everything from, you know, the actual witch trials of Europe and Salem to more contemporary stuff, their basic definition is like there's a disproportionate response to a perceived threat. So at the beginning of the podcast, you mentioned like rock and roll, and like, yeah, there was a period where, you know, senators were believing that rock music was turning people into Satan worshipers. You know, that hasn't gone away. There's still people who burn Harry Potter because they think J.K. Rowling's doing the same thing. So there's people who burn Harry Potter because they think she's a transphobe. But obviously that definition entails a certain like subjective evaluation of like what would be a proportionate response. So like in the case of the birthday cake for George Washington, I think it would be a fine response to like write a critical essay that is like, yeah, slaves did experience happiness. I know it sounds taboo to say that, but like maybe the way you're representing these illustrations and the fact that you also don't talk about in this book how the slave ran away, it could give like a 5-year-old kid sort of a, not a full understanding. I'm all for debate. I'm all for that. The moral panic is let's petition the publisher to remove this book from Amazon because it poses such a threat that we need to classify it in the same way Amazon classifies firearms. This is people protesting eBay to remove Dr. Seuss's books. Again, treating it as if this is actually like a taboo good, like a gun or a drug. And those people are real, and some of them have tenure, and they're going to continue doing this to books.
Yeah, they did that to Abigail Shrier's book, Irreversible Damage, I think was the title of her book. She was one of the first journalists to come out about the trans movement. And, we've been following that at Skeptic. I comment a lot about it online, particularly male to female trans in women's sports. It bothers me a lot. But then I'm accused of being, a part of the moral panic on the right that, how many male to female trans athletes are there? Well, there's 500,000 NCAA athletes in the United States, and there's 12, trans athletes. Come on, what's the big deal? I mean, that's kind of the typical response I get. Well,
sure.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. But on the other hand, it's still not right for the women that got bumped off the podium or something. I mean, what about them? Women's rights.
Yeah, I mean, you could flip it around and be like, how many people are actually killed by the police every year?
Yeah, well, that's true, and not many. Yeah,
statistically.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
that's
but
a good point.
That's an argument. You might not want to make in certain places, but yeah, I mean, the point is like, I encountered something similar where people were like, you just wrote a 280-page book about left-wing censorship at a moment when all these states are passing legislation to get gay books out of like the K through 12 curriculum and stuff like that, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not in support of that. I actually think there's an enormous amount of resources going into fighting that and covering it, where like if I want to write a book about that, I'm not really even sure I would have anything interesting to say about it. Like the idea that I can not support left-wing censorship, the idea that makes me some sort of like reactionary or something, it's a stupid ad hominem attack. But at the end of the day, I think there's, as we're seeing now with, these right-wing people trying to criminalize flag burning and stuff, there's very few people that are actually committed to free speech, including speech with which they disagree. There's a lot of people who give that image, and then it's like 2 years later when you see, something that upsets them and triggers them, things change pretty quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, I encountered that back in the 90s when I was writing about the Holocaust deniers and discovered that it's illegal in a lot of countries, including Canada. And so because we went up to, my co-author Alex Grobman and I went up to visit Ernst Zundel at his house, and he had a couple big Aryan bodyguards, which was kind of funny. And it was like, oh, okay, this guy's living the dream. But, we kind of defended his right to say whatever he wants. And in fact, again, just ignore them. The big thing he did to promote himself, as did David Irving, was to spend most of his time talking about how they don't want you to read my book. Right. And so it ends up, actually, making these people famous. And but when you look at the law, it's like, why is the debate over how many people died in the Holocaust? Because they don't actually deny, okay, it wasn't 6 million Jews, that they say that. But they're not saying no Jews were killed. They're going, well, it's like 1 to 2 million. And so they have these kind of sort of nuanced arguments. So my analogy is, what if we're debating how many Native Americans died post-Columbus, mainly due to diseases or whatever? Well, how many were here at the start in 1492? Well, there's debate about that. 100 million, 10 million, 50 million, somewhere in there. And then how many died? 90% or so. Okay, so if I disagree with the mainstream archaeologists and Native American scholars and say, well, I don't think it was that bad. I don't think it was 50 million. I think it was only 10 million. Am I a Holocaust denier? Right? I mean, this is the problem. The moment you go down the road of, well, but that guy right there, we don't like him. Yeah, I know, but there's a broader principle here. Anybody who says the numbers can be revised under whatever conditions, regardless of the topic, okay, so then you have the problem of identifying that.
For sure. Yeah, no, it reminds me of like this sort of height of the BLM stuff where people started using the word genocide. And I'm like, genocide? Really? Like, is that...
Yeah, right. That's not what that word means.
Is there a genocide going on in Southside Chicago? No, I don't think so.
Right.
Is it bad that, people get killed by the police? For sure. Is it doing your side a favor by describing it as a genocide? But like, obviously, if you're, again, like if you're on the masthead of the New York Times, if you're at Yale, if you're at other universities, like, do you want to be that person in the room who responds and says like, I don't think this is a genocide. Like, you're not using that word correctly. Good luck doing that. There's been enough people ousted from these positions to, in the same way I interviewed people at publishing who are like, I think it's insane. Like, I literally, like, you brought up Peterson a few times. I literally interviewed someone who was in the room in the town hall at Penguin Random House Canada, in which the staff was saying we need to not publish Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, not because they thought the book was transphobic or whatever, but because of Peterson's statements on pronouns. And some of these people were literally crying in the town hall and saying, this is like, we cannot platform Peterson and stuff. And the person I interviewed, who identifies as left of center, who's a woman of color, who was like, I have a kid, I care about the books we're publishing and stuff. But she was like, that's insane that we wouldn't publish his book. It's insane for a number of reasons. One, she's like, it's not Mein Kampf. It's like a self-help book. Right. Two, she's like, at the end of the day, we're a business, and we're also not a left-wing vanity press. Like, we're a business. We're in the business of publishing books, and this dude is essentially going to be a cash cow for us, which he was.
Didn't you say in that section that they hadn't even read his book, right? It was just still in a manuscript form, and not everybody had seen it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the common denominator of all this stuff, even inside a publisher, right? So, like, people who don't work in publishing might not know that, just because a book is coming out from HarperCollins or Simon & Schuster, it doesn't mean that, like, everyone that works there has read the book. And in some cases, like, high profile books, like, it's going to be a very select few people who are working on that manuscript who have access to it. So in Peterson's case, like, my interview subject was like, this is like some 23-year-old who works in like the marketing department. Like, they're not like an editor. They don't have to work intimately with the text. They're just doing, something so distant, and they're crying and saying they can't do their work. And it's just like, come on,
Yeah, the crying thing. Let's think about that for a second. So you see these videos in North Korea when Kim Jong-un's father died, Kim Jong-il. And people are weeping and sobbing for weeks on end. Now, obviously, they're faking. We know they're faking, right? I mean, this is just kind of a show. They know they're faking. The regime must know that they're faking, and they know the regime knows that they're faking. It's almost like a performative thing that everybody agrees. It's a common knowledge thing. We're just going to go along with it because this is what we do, or something like that. Or is there some self-deception, like the people that are crying in the room over Jordan Peterson? They really do feel emotional about this. They've got themselves worked up because for them that is their cause, patriarchy or whatever. And maybe this is a sign of some moral progress that, as you mentioned, the rights and slavery and civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, the Vietnam War. We've solved all those problems. They're gone now, or pretty much gone. So what's left? And maybe, the person sobbing in the room over Jordan Peterson, that's
12
her.
Rules for Life is
that's
left.
My cause, right? That's my Vietnam War. Truth to power.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, just anecdotally, I've encountered a number of true believers, and I've quite literally seen people cry over nothing. But in that case, it's like if you're literally crying over 12 Rules for Life and it's genuine, it's not crocodile tears, the response is not to cancel Jordan Peterson's book. The response is like to make sure this person has healthcare and they can like go see a therapist, like that's a problem with that person. That's not a problem with, publishing or whatever. But and then it's like, okay, if you're just going along with this because you're incentivized to do so, like that's less of a psychological problem maybe and more of like a moral problem. But I think those two personality types for sure exist. And to your point, like it's possible that like people who have these moral concerns over racism or sexism or whatever, these could also be people who have like really low attention spans and like no work ethic, and who are just going to sit around and like express their concerns through tweeting or trying to cancel a book. And like in their mind, that's as normal as, mindlessly scrolling on TikTok, as opposed to like going to the gym and getting a workout in.
Do you know Corey Clark, the social psychologist who does work on women in the sciences and in academia? She's got an interesting hypothesis. She was at this conference I mentioned where Chris Rufo was, let's see, how can I summarize it? That the whole kind of hypersensitivity, victimization culture, and all that is largely due to the shift over the last half century or so of more and more women coming into academia and publishing and so on. Women score higher in openness to experience, I think, but the main one was neuroticism. The big five: ocean, openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, introversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Neuroticism is not a good word now, but what it means is emotional highs and lows. So women score higher than men on this. So anyway, not openness to, it's agreeableness and neuroticism. So her thesis is that as more women move into a profession and dominate it, they're going to shift the focus toward the things that women are more concerned about. Hurt feelings and harm to people, ideas can be dangerous, and so on. And so she's a bit controversial for even floating this out there, but she's got some interesting data. She's trying to publish on this, and I think that would apply maybe to the publishing world as well. Maybe there's something there.
Yeah, I mean, the people who work in publishing, it's overwhelmingly women. I always thought it was funny to me because there's been a push to make publishing more diverse, and by publishing I mean not just publishing houses, but literary agencies, like who are the agents brokering deals, editors, magazines, etc. So people are like, it's overwhelmingly white, it's overwhelmingly cisgender, it's overwhelmingly etc. But the thing it is most glaringly overwhelmingly is women. Particularly, I'm not even joking when I say if you're a novelist right now, and let's say you're a novelist and you want to write like a book for young men, and that's your audience. You're like, hey, young men aren't reading. I want to write this like masculine thriller. I really like want to connect with them. That could be your audience, but the audience that you actually have to write for is the middle to upper class white woman who lives in Midtown Manhattan, who is going to be the editor on that, who's going to be the agent you have to impress, who's going to be the head of the imprint. Like that's just objective. It is overwhelmingly women. And personally, I don't think that's totally incidental to the things that you're talking about, the sort of like hurt feelings, like all that sort of stuff. But I also don't think it's incidental to why so many men, young men, high school kids, like really don't like the books that they're assigned. Like I actually had someone after my book come out, a mom had sent me a direct message on my pretty much defunct X account and said she had 3 young boys who are all in K through 12, and like they all hate reading. And she's like, but the books they're assigned, it's like often like female protagonists like talking about their feelings for 20 pages and stuff. And it's like, yeah, it's not, I don't think I need like a PhD in gender studies from Columbia to get to the bottom of that one.
That's right. Okay, a couple other quick questions here. Rachel Dolezal, why is it okay for a man to identify as a woman, but not for a white woman to identify as a black woman?
I'm glad I'm not aspiring towards an academic career. That sounds like just giving me just enough rope to hang myself on that one. Honestly, man, I don't have a clear answer to that. I mean, I understand. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think about?
Well, I'll tell you. Well, the funny story about that was that after that story broke and it was a big brouhaha. Basically, if you don't know, she's a white Jewish girl that was raised in a Jewish home, I guess, in state of Washington.
Yeah.
And then she became the head of the NAACP branch in state of Washington.
Yep.
As identified as a black woman. She's got kind of curly hair. I mean, okay, some features, sort of, kind of, maybe if you squint, use your imagination. She's a black woman. She identifies as a black woman. Anyway, then I guess her parents found out and said, "Hey, she's not a black girl. She's a Jewish girl. She's part of our white family. Come on, man, what's going on here?" Anyway, so she got mobbed, and then somebody wrote a piece about this, like, why is asking the question I just asked.
Rebecca Tuval.
Yes,
yeah, philosopher.
Rebecca Tuval. And then that became a big, controversy. Anyway, then like a year later, Richard Dawkins tweets about it. He was a little behind the curve on what the thing we should be commenting on. So he's like, "Hey, I just found out about this controversy." And hey, why is it okay to identify as as this but not that? And he got, not only did he get mobbed, the American Humanist Association is sort of the largest American collection of humanists that goes back to the 1930s, and they give out a Humanist of the Year award. And all the big guns have got, just name anybody, Isaac Asimov and all these great humanists and scholars and scientists. Anyway, he was given the award, I don't know, 1989 or something, and they took it away because he didn't even say, "Here's my opinion." He just said, "We should be able to discuss this, right?" It's like, no. And we're going to punish you for even bringing it up.
Yeah,
it was astonishing.
I sort of skim read her essay, as well as some of the commentary around it. But yeah, there was a whole open letter against the journal over that. And I think her basic point was like, and she was coming from like a leftist sort of critique background where she was like, race is a social construct, gender is a social construct. Here's sort of like the logical reasons as to why those two kinds of like transitions correlate to one another. I don't really even remember why that was, such a big deal that it was. I think it was just the idea of a white woman in particular making the argument that I guess in theory someone could just like choose to be black was so off-putting to, people like Judith Butler and others who spearheaded the attack against her.
Yeah. Well, the kind of sad coda to that story was she was outed, I don't know, maybe 6 months, a year ago, as an OnlyFans content producer. She had kind of dropped out for a while after that whole controversy, and she became like
Rebecca
a middle school.
Tuval?
No.
I was like, I'm pretty sure she got tenure and was like
Rachel Dolezal. Rachel Dolezal.
Okay.
Yeah. So she like moved to the Midwest somewhere and was like teaching middle school at just like a public school, or maybe it was grammar school or whatever. Anyway, somebody found out she was an OnlyFans cam girl. And you know what that means, right? So she got probably some dad found her on there, went, "Hey, that's my kid's teacher."
Oh my God.
And then she got fired, and it's like, come on. I mean, on cancel culture, why is it not enough to just disagree with somebody or even criticize their ideas? Why do they have to be fired? Why do they have to lose their job, lose their contract, lose their finances?
Yeah. Do you know if she was still identifying as black when she was on the webcam?
No, I don't think so. No.
Okay.
No.
I was like, she cornering the racial cosplay.
No, I don't think so. Probably not.
Yeah. So like, if you had walked by my office when I was working on this book, like you'd probably hear two things. One, me cursing and just being like, "Oh my God, these people are so intolerant and just so punitive." But on the other hand, like I laughed out loud multiple times reading through the stuff. Even the Rebecca or not the Jessica Cluess stuff that we were talking about earlier. There's a number of really funny things in there, like darkly comical. But what wasn't funny was like she lost her agent. I'm pretty sure she went from having like 3 books published with like a big 5 press to just never being heard from again. And I'm like, this woman could be a mom. She could have a mortgage to pay.
Right.
Like these are the same sort of leftists who 6 tweets ago were talking about like Fight for 15 and like universal healthcare. And it's like, you just like totally destroyed, to use like some Marxist language, like the means production for this woman to reproduce herself. Like
Right.
she's out, she's done. So I don't know how you could not live with an enormous amount of cognitive dissonance to do that to someone. At the same time, you're again preaching about equality and everyone needs health insurance and livable wages and etc.
Yeah. All right, Adam. Last question. Are you optimistic about the future of the publishing world? Maybe this is a pendulum that'll self-correct and swing back toward the center?
No. No, I am not. I think there's some reason to be optimistic for certain, like a few publishing houses that sort of buck the trends and have created a market, like in the sense of like, we don't care if you're conservative, progressive, we're going to publish you. And like some of those publishing houses are doing well financially. But as far as like mainstream publishing, I don't know. I kind of see it like mainstream academia. And the difference is like, you can't legislate away stuff going on at like Penguin Random House and Simon and Schuster. And I think in many ways, like, even though I think the peak of the moral hysteria has subsided a bit, the things that were institutionalized during that period are not going away. It's not like this publisher is going to tell a sensitivity reader like, oh, we've solved all the racism, like your services are no longer needed. Why? Because
Right.
they're probably going to get tweeted at by that sensitivity reader for, you know, being racist. And, you know, I have a number of people I know who work in publishing, who are agents. And they're like, yeah, the same practical problems that emerged like a decade ago are still ones we're dealing with today, which is like, oh, there's a fictional character who says something racist. Like, we need to change it. And an agent's like, well, there's racist people in the world. Like, that's how they talk. Also, this book is set in like 1820. So why would they talk? So I don't know. I'm not terribly optimistic about books.
Right. Yeah, I guess I'm not either. I just keep my head down and publish my magazine. All right, here it is. That book is dangerous. It's a great, important book. I still appreciate your work for trying to self-correct, course correct on the publishing world. We'll see if they read it and take you seriously. Hopefully before the 2028 election, Dems. Come on. We need two strong parties.
Any Democratic donors listening, I'm more than happy to be an advisor.
Right. There you go.
Yeah.
Sensitivity reader for men,
young men,
Democratic males. How to man up. You could be the Jordan Peterson of the Democrats.